Aikwe, Nekinamalita, and this is my channel, The Midnight Librarian. Today I will be doing my January wrap up. I am still sick. I am still congested, and so my voice is still funny. I apologize, but I've been stuck at home for a couple days now and finally have some energy to do something, and so this is what I wanted to do to also try to get it out on time. So let's just move on. Let's just move on. January was a busy month. I went from working 3 partial days in the office and seeing no one to working full-time in an office seeing everyone. So it's been an adjustment. I forgot how we used to do this before, and I don't remember when I had time to read. For January reads, I read 8 books in the month of January, which is not bad at all. 2,211 pages and an average of 3.625 rating. In terms of ratings, I have 1 1-star, 0 2 stars, 1 3-star, 1 3.5 star, 3 4 stars, 1 4.5 star, and 1 5-star. In terms of genres, I have 2 nonfictions, 2 thrillers, 1 anthology, 1 romance, 1 fantasy, and 1 poetry collection. For audience, I have 1 children's, 1 middle grade, 1.5 adult, mostly because this one in particular felt new adult to me, so that's what I categorized it, but I think it's marketed as young adult, and then 4 adult. And then when it comes to format, I have 4 physical books and 4 audiobooks, which isn't that bad. If you saw my January TBR, basically what it was a rollover. So December and January I decided to mood read and had set up a basic what I was interested in December. I'll link that above in the cards as well as down in the description down below. Ultimately though, I wanted to just kind of ease my way out of 2021 and ease my way into 2022 and just let myself mood read. I did have some things that I was interested in. I was hoping I would get to it, but ultimately didn't pressure myself if I didn't. I did have a secret TBR in which I wanted to read books that were about Little Red Riding Hood. I had planned on doing a themed reading vlog for this, and ultimately had a stressful weekend where of course I started all these books around the same time, and one weekend just had an overly stressful weekend, and I kept associating that stress with those books even though it had nothing to do with it, and ended up having to just kind of pause, soft DNF all of those books. So all these here had started these and this one, and yeah, just wasn't really getting into it, and then having a stressful weekend, I just wanted an escape, and those weren't it. They weren't doing it for me. So let's get into the books that I did manage to read. My first book, I made a conscious decision to start out 2022 with a poetry collection. I did this last year for 2021. I always end up overthinking the first book I'm going to read for the year, thinking that's going to reflect the rest of my year. I overthink it. But this year I went with You Better Be Lightning by Andrea Gibson. I absolutely enjoyed this book. This is Andrea Gibson is a non-binary slam poet that also deals with a chronic illness, Lyme disease, and they talk about their experiences within this book. Basically it's all a collection of poetry, and there are so many things that I wasn't exactly ready for how impacted I would be by this book. There were so many poems that immediately had me tearing up. There were others that I was just like, holy shit. It was just emotional. And it was also just gratifying, and I like rooted for some of these poems, and others I was just like I felt for. it was amazing. I really enjoyed it. It was my first 5-star read for January, which love starting that off with 2022 with. And yeah, ultimately just really enjoyed it. And of course that cover is absolutely gorgeous. Next, I read The Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien. If this is the first book in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, though I hear that ultimately that's supposed to be one book. If you don't know what this is, basically, the Lord of the Rings, we're following Frodo Baggins, who ends up getting charged with taking this one ring, evil ring, to rule them all and bring darkness upon Middle Earth to safety. And he has his friends to help him along, and they are all hobbits, which are halflings. And there's elves, and there's dwarves, and there's wizards, and it's all just very fantastic. This is the first time I read The Fellowship of the Ring. I, of course, have seen the movies. I grew up with them, but have not read Lord of the Rings. I've only read and reread The Hobbit, which is the prequel to this series. And I enjoyed this. I didn't love it as much as I do The Hobbit, just because there was multiple instances in which I thought it was there's just some times where it felt very meandering. It was very slow, just because we go through several chapters and I'm like, you have not moved very far. And then once they actually got going, it was like, oh, this is fantastic. I really enjoy this. Yeah, I just ultimately had a really fun time with it. This was another one. This was one that I listened to through my library. I did give this 4 stars, but just because there was so many meandering parts. Technically, I don't know if I would necessarily consider this a reread, though I'm really tempted to. Just because I did attempt to read this before and gave up, and I couldn't remember how far I made it. Though Goodreads tracked that, and I made it 80% of the way. So that's frustrating. I have started on The Two Towers. I just haven't finished it yet. Mostly because the audiobook that I borrowed from my library was due sooner than I expected, and I couldn't find, by that time we were back in person, I couldn't find time to necessarily listen to the audiobook as much as I did with The Fellowship of the Ring. So I had to wait for my next hold on it because there was a wait list. So hopefully I'll finish The Two Towers in February, but we'll see. My next read was When No One Was Watching by Alyssa Cole. This one was on my TBR for January, so I was really happy that I was able to get through this. Actually, I don't think I officially put it on my TBR for YouTube. I did put it on my January hopefuls for Instagram. But I did have it in my December TBR, which I was just like, okay, that's rolling over. So I don't think I mentioned it, so I apologize. But yeah, this, I'm counting it as like I had it on there. I read it. Yay. This one worked for the Buzzwordathon challenge for January 2022, which was to read a book with one of the 5 W's in it. So who, what, when, where, why. I don't know if how was necessarily counted in that or not. But Buzzwordathon is something that Kayla from Books and Lala had created. It is now a Goodreads challenge and a Storygraph challenge as well. And I'm using it to kind of read some of my backlist books. This one I got not too long ago, but I've been hearing really good things, particularly from Jess from Bowties&Books, and wanted to see what all the hype was about. I have read Alyssa Cole before. I read, was it her Princess in Theory? Just the first book in that series, and was not a fan, so gave this one a shot. This one is a mystery thriller where Sydney Green has grown up in Brooklyn and is living in the house that she grew up in, and all the neighbors that she grew up with and like grew to know and love are going missing. They're just up and leaving. For sale signs are popping up. Basically her neighborhood is being gentrified, and she's trying to figure out how and why, because a lot of these people that are up and moving had loved and took care of their homes. So Sydney believes there's something more going on here, and one of her new neighbors, Theo, believes it also. He also thinks that something weird's going on. Theo moves in with his girlfriend next door to Sydney, and thinks that his girlfriend is acting real weird, particularly with the other new neighbors in the neighborhood. They believe it's a very them versus us scenario, and it was very, I enjoyed it. For the most part. What I gave this 3.5 stars. I did enjoy it. I thought it was creepy in some elements. I liked the whole them versus us was very, I don't know, it's frightening. And this also, just this who can Sydney trust type deal was very nerve-wracking as well. And then of course I was anxious the whole time because there is very much this white privilege going on where these, of course, white neighbors are coming in and threatening to call the cops because like they feel like they're getting harassed or feel like they're being threatened by really just simple questions, or like, hey, can you be more polite, like for being called out for being rude. Essentially, that in particular was making me very anxious throughout the whole book. I ultimately found that the villains were very villainy, if that makes sense. It just felt like it was almost cartoonish. That there was like the who can you trust only lasted so long before you're like, oh, okay, that's pretty obvious who you can and can't trust, I guess. So that felt very it felt very black and white. As bad as that sounds. So I wish it was more complex than that. I believe Cindy, from reading with Cindy, I don't believe that's her channel name anymore, but I'll put it down, had said the same thing of just like it was like it was obvious who the villains were. They were villains throughout the whole book, and for some reason I was not expecting a sex scene in here. I should have thought otherwise given Alyssa Cole's other writing, but I was just not expecting it, and I don't feel like it was necessarily needed. But yeah, another book that I really liked the cover of, and yeah, for the most part, I enjoyed it. Next, I read When Diplomat Rishi, which was another one on my January TBR, so yes. This was also one of the books that was on my 12 books that will self-destruct in 12 months, which I will leave that video linked above and below. Basically, Dimple has just graduated high school. Her mom is very adamant to find her the perfect Indian husband, as is her father, and she thinks that they might be over it when they allow her to go to this camp in San Francisco. I think essentially it's this like, what's it called? It's some kind of a web developer camp thing held at a college over the summer. For Rishi, he's a romantic, his parents had made an agreement with Dimple's parents that they would meet at this web developer camp, and Rishi would have to essentially get to know and woo her. Things ensue, and they end up learning things about each other that they didn't expect. I ultimately found this really interesting. I only gave this 3 stars, mostly because there was some like moments where I'm like, wait, what? So this is a contemporary romance. I believe this is pitched as young adult. I would almost say new adults because they both have graduated high school. They're talking about college. Maybe like new adult is more into college. I'm not sure. But ultimately there were some aspects in here that I'm just like, okay. It was just kind of, it was like these tropes that I kind of expected to happen. And like they ended up doing it to each other, and for some reason they both felt entitled that like the other, like each other was in the right. So it was just kind of like this hypocrisy, and I also felt like, you know, the conflict that of course makes them like that causes them to like not talk, and because due to miscommunication towards like the last little bit of the book felt very over dramatic. I don't know. I feel like I would have enjoyed this when I was this age maybe, and perhaps that's just due to who the audience, who it's targeted for. I feel like I would have enjoyed this more like 10 years ago. It wasn't bad so far. Like it wasn't necessarily bad. I'm hesitant to say that I am interested in continuing on with this particular series. I think the next one is There's Something About Sweetie, mostly because I know that we're following Rishi's younger brother, who I believe is like in his last year of high school, I think, or either that or time has passed and he has also graduated high school. I don't know. I just have a feeling that it'll kind of miss the mark for me because of the audience that it's targeted for. Like, I'm not it. So that's just kind of how I feel about it. But I also just really enjoy the discussions that were had in this. I think my one thing too, so Rishi enjoys comic book art. He likes drawing, and he likes illustrating. But the whole time they were calling it a talent, and that's one thing that I've always fought against, just because you're not born with artistic talent. It's a skill that you have to hone as well as everything else. So like Rishi took years to hone his skill in illustration, and to keep calling it a talent is like completely ignoring the years of sacrifice and practice that someone puts into that. So I think that was kind of bothersome to me, but I am glad that of the discussions that took place around that. So in terms of Rishi wanting to pursue art versus like the whole dilemma that he had, that was really interesting to me. And I also really appreciated the fact that the discussions around Dimple and not wanting to be stuck in as someone's housewife, she wanted to like be her own person, and the discussions around that. So I thought the discussions in here were very important and very interesting, particularly when it had to do with their cultures and their family ideals. So that was really fun. It was just that the audience I felt for, I ultimately felt like it was over dramatic, and there was just tropes that I was just like, like it wasn't ones that I hated, but it wasn't necessarily the best. So this one also counted for a Buzzwordathon. Next, I read Once Upon an Eid, edited by S.K. Ali and Aisha Saeed. So this one, I originally didn't own, actually. I had listened to this via my library and then enjoyed it after listening to it, that I got a physical copy. I remember Kayla from Books and Lala talking about this and really enjoying it. This one I gave a 4.5 stars. It was great. Ultimately, I have no real complaints about it, other than that it didn't quite hit me as much as I would like typical 5-star reads to hit me in terms of emotionally. Otherwise though, I have like no issue with this book. This was fantastic. This is, I believe, a middle grade, an anthology of how different Muslims throughout the world kind of celebrate Eid and what that means for them. And I thought it was lovely. I thought it was really fun. I love the different the different lessons that came out of each story, and looking at this is the first time I'm actually like looking into this. I really enjoy the art in here. I thought it was really cute, and just like a good little read. Just like, next was kind of just like, I pulled this one off my shelf because I knew I got it not too long ago, and just hadn't picked it up, and I just wanted like a quick little read, and so I picked up If Sharks Disappeared by Lily Williams. So this is basically just a children's book, or a picture book, or whatever you want to call it. Basically just kind of like going through the history of sharks and why they're important to the environment and ocean ecology. And it's ultimately just really cute, and I really did enjoy it. I thought it was fun. The art is really nice, but ultimately found it really cute, and I thought it was a good way to kind of inform children like why sharks are important to the environment. Ultimately gave this 4 stars. It was fun, but almost a little forgettable, but that's probably because I already know, and it's not I'm not the geared audience for it, but I still enjoyed it. Next, I have my first disappointing read of 2022, and that is A Flicker in the Dark by Stacey Willingham. I think I want to do a full like spoilery video on this, on why I found it disappointing. But basically, for this book, we are following Chloe Davis, who, when she was 12, ended up figuring out that her dad was the cause of 6 girls going missing in her hometown in Louisiana. After he goes to prison for life, like, her family just kind of has to live with that fact and the consequences of that. So years later, Chloe Davis is now a psychologist in Baton Rouge and has finally found the happiness that she's been trying to chase all her life, and girls start going missing again, and she's finding parallels between how they're going missing now and when they were going missing back when she was 12. She's feeling like these parallels, like she's maybe paranoid of these parallels, like if they really exist or not, and things ensue. I feel like from that synopsis alone, I should have known that I wouldn't have enjoyed this. I do not like the unreliable narrator trope. I really just, particularly when it's hinged on the main protagonist's like trauma, I don't like it. And there were so many other things about this book, and particularly in the tonality. It was very privileged sounding. It was just, I didn't ultimately, like, the way that Stacey Willingham ended up writing this book made me not like Chloe Davis at all. It got to the point where, like, halfway through the book, I started skim reading it because I was just like, I just want to see if I'm right or not. I wasn't, but I wasn't surprised either about this. It felt ridiculous. I didn't enjoy this. So I give this 1 star. I may end up doing a full spoiler review of this book, but at the same time, I don't necessarily want to promote it. So, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see when I get better. How's that? And then finally, my last book for January is The Tastemakers, 7 Immigrant Women Who Revolutionized Food in America. Mayuk Sen. I apologize if I pronounced that wrong. But basically, so this is another book of the month book. I believe this was this was a bonus book for my, I believe, January book of the month pick. But I believe it came out towards the end of November of 2021. And basically, Sen ends up talking about 7 immigrant women who revolutionized food in America. And the reason why he's doing this is because women, and particularly immigrant women, don't get as much credit as they deserve for influencing the food in America. We know of Julia Child. We know of, like, all these white older men. And Julia Child, who was deemed the French chef, despite the fact that she was born in Pasadena, had been in France for a couple of years, and then came back to America and started cooking French cooking, like, it was kind of ridiculous. So, and Sen explores that and and actually goes through some of Julia Child's history, and in comparison with some of these other women, particularly Madeline, who is French, who tried to come to America and was constantly put against Julia Child. They're just like, oh, that's nice, but it's not Julia Child worth. And it got to the point where Madeline herself was just like, Julia Child is ridiculous, like, quit, like, she's trash, like, but stop it. So, which I thought it was very interesting, that comparison, particularly when Julia Child herself had said that French women always like to think that they know what they're talking about, but they don't. So there was things thrown both ways. But I ultimately really enjoyed this. I really do enjoy nonfiction food books. But I'm always hesitant to go into them because typically they are written for or by or about white men or white women, and I just don't really care. This one I really enjoyed because we get a bunch of, we get 7 different cultural backgrounds and how they came to America and how And yes, some of them ended up trying to assimilate more than others, but towards the later part of the book, like, they ultimately didn't care about Americans and how they deemed their cooking. They wanted to cook for themselves. They wanted to cook for their own culture. They wanted to cook for them. So that I really appreciated. So ultimately this was a really fun book. I think I ended up giving this 4 stars. I'm not sure how it could have necessarily been better, but it just doesn't feel like a 5-star to me. Like, it makes me want to go out and find more cookbooks, and honestly, like, I've never actually like gone through a cookbook and read like the personal biography, mostly because I didn't think that was a thing that people did, was that when they write cookbooks they put their own personal little twists in it. And now I'm even more intrigued, and I have a collection of cookbooks that I want to go read, or want to go through just to see. I even have Julia Child's cookbooks. I didn't buy them myself. My dad gave them to me, which I appreciate, but I don't think I've ever used them. But I'm just curious ultimately, and ultimately makes me want to like go out and search for more cookbooks, and like just find these different personal essays that other chefs have put into their works, into their cookbooks. So yeah, this was ultimately really fun. Concludes my January wrap up. If you have read any of these, I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the description, in the comments down below. Otherwise, let me know what your favorite read for January was. And I hope that you are in the mental mindset to enjoy your reading. I will see you again soon in another video. Chew.